Washington State University allows us to reflect on the meaning and implications of living together as religiously diverse people. The Palouse has adherents of all the major religions and most of the minor ones. There's a huge secular presence here as well. Islam is the second most popular religion after Christianity in Whitman County. I have always followed the view that the study of each religion with its cultural and ethical traditions offers the opportunity to enlarge the self and find ways to view the humanity and personhood of the other. Lately, however, I've been battling wits with some Facebook friends who do not see it that way. They think that religious traditions are huge, monolithic kinds of things that can be represented as simple or even simplistic views of life. Often these friends choose a demeaning stereotype of the religion and look no further to represent it. One of my Facebook friends, for example, a classmate from high school, recently posted a photograph of a group of Muslim women waiting at the airport for a friend or family member. Like many people who do that, they carried a sign with the person's name on it and a welcoming message to the United States. But the fact that the women were wearing hijab and the sign was written in Arabic as well as English brought my Facebook friend to an entirely different conclusion. She, on the suggestion of a meme that was posted along with the photograph, thought only in the most suspicious terms. Those who shared this meme went straight against the evidence of the photograph itself and interpreted it in a way that reinforced negative, twisted stereotypes. Of course, my duty was to point this out, which I did. My research lately has carried me into the topic of religion in Palestine and Israel. I'm a professor here at WSU in philosophy and philosophy of religion. In this region of the world, which I shall visit for the first time in July, it is not just a matter of contesting the virtual space of the internet, but a dispute over the actual spaces where people set up their households and live. But the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is also about the deep human need to have a place one can call one's own. Syed Qutb, an early leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, wrote, "The idea of homeland is an idea of the consciousness, not a piece of land." The thesis of my project reflects the pluralism that we find in WSU's Islamic Awareness Week. I believe that the Jewish people, on the heels of a real and terrible Holocaust, required relief in the form of a safe refuge and place to live. Europe had shown Jewish people that they could not rely on the goodwill of citizens or states to protect their interests or even their lives. The idea of a Jewish return to the land of ancient Israel was a powerful one. The problem was that non-Jewish people already lived there. Many of these inhabitants were Muslims, landowners from centuries before, who had been citizens of the Ottoman Empire before the British took control of the area after World War I. Today, the descendants of these inhabitants retain ancient attachments to the very same place as the Jews, who call it the land of Israel. After World War II, when Britain gave up control, the state of Israel declared its independence as a Jewish state. Palestinians were displaced in a Nakba, Arabic for catastrophe. They were unable to retain authority and control over their own areas of life. The area of displacement was increased in the 1967 war, when Israel seized the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. It continues even now as Jewish Israeli settlements encroach on Palestinian land in the West Bank. Palestinians continue to yearn for a recognized homeland. The solution to the ongoing conflict in Palestine and Israel, as I see it, relies on a distinction between the space of Israel/Palestine, which is finite and contested, and place, which is not confined to space and always belongs to oneself. Place simply requires recognition. In other words, we need to recognize the plural aspect of place in the shared region that is Palestine/Israel. We forget that Muslims and Jews have lived in peace for centuries and will continue to live in peace as they share finite spaces on this globe and grant one another the dignity of the other's place. The remainder of my remarks will show how this might be conceptually possible in Palestine/Israel. Let us define the concept of space as location and the possibility of different kinds of presence, while place incorporates the experiences and aspirations of a people. The distinction between place and space may serve as a tool for helping to resolve the conflict. Palestinians, for example, maintain that Jewish Israelis have mythologized the places mentioned in the Bible and have assumed those places as their own, to the exclusion of Palestinian aspirations and legal right to the land. Jewish Israelis argue that Palestinians do not recognize that Israel constitutes the best place in the world that can provide a safe haven for Jews, a haven necessary to protect the Jewish people in the wake of the Holocaust. Present discussions sometimes collapse concepts of space and place into one another, and thereby neglect to see the dual need for shared space and independent place. The spaces where Palestinians live have become dangerous, isolated, and squeezed smaller and smaller, while the places in which Jewish Israelis live become increasingly militarized, unsafe, and threatened by attack from hostile neighbors. Neither Palestinians nor Jewish Israelis feel the joy of repose in their own respective places. The building of a separation wall or barrier in the West Bank, begun in 1994, serves as vivid confirmation that this is a dispute where space, or sometimes the lack of it, is a central concern. Space may further be defined as the ability to move. Space can be variously experienced as the relative location of objects or places, as the distances and expanses that separate or link places, and more abstractly as the area defined by a network of places. Given our human powers to move about, space ideally signifies openness and possibility. Space specifies a necessary condition for human flourishing. One can see that under this definition, the construction of the separation barrier implies that humans can also experience space as finite and constricting. Raja Shahade, the Palestinian attorney and writer, speaks of the inhabitants' acute sense of finite space when he writes of Palestine. Such a small land with an outstanding variety of topographies, one snow-capped mountain, which belongs to Syria, one desert, one freshwater lake, and another very salty one, and one proper river, one of everything. Shahade describes Palestinian space as beautiful, thereby conferring on this particular finite space a sense of place. He writes, "The persistent pain that the failure of that struggle would be in time shared by Arabs, Jews, and lovers of nature anywhere in the world. All would grieve, as I have, at the continuing destruction of an exquisitely beautiful place." Shahade describes Palestine as a place rich with meaning and value. Recognition of the Palestinian value of place is a necessary step forward. It will not do to insist, as some do, that Palestine is a cultural fiction, or to attempt to erase the very real Palestinian sense of place. Shahade has spent much of his life as an attorney working on land cases. He amassed a great body of documentation pertaining to the loss of land by Palestinians in the West Bank. One of his main points in his 1985 book, occupiers' law, Israel and the West Bank, is that Israelis have applied their own laws to the West Bank, which before occupation in 1967 came under Jordanian law. Israelis have circumvented Jordanian law and its common law traditions in a number of ways. First, they have established the principle that if a landowner physically leaves their property for any length of time, the land is considered empty and reverts to public land. Shahade argues that this unusual principle goes against both Jordanian and Ottoman legal practice. He has produced many documents in court clearly showing prior ownership by Palestinian people. Second, Israelis have allowed increasing amounts of so-called public land to be occupied by Jewish Israeli settlers. Finally, land that was formerly occupied by the Jordanian army has been taken over by the Israeli army and then deemed open to further settlement by Jewish Israelis. Shahade's careful attention to the legal struggles of ordinary Palestinians came to a head in 1993 when Palestinian diaspora leaders signed the Oslo Accords. This agreement gave certain rights and recognition to Palestine, but at the cost of casting in stone the status quo on the West Bank. Shahade lost the accumulation of 20 years of painstaking legal work at a single stroke through the actions of Palestinian leaders who were unable to represent the interests of common West Bank landowners. In his 2007 book, Palestinian Walks, Shahade explores the effects such a cataclysmic change had on his thinking and way of life. Now that the constriction of Palestinian space through Israeli settlements had attained quasi-legal status, his vocation of collecting lengthy legal documentation seemed to lose its point. Yet even while describing the pain of losing a battle for Palestinian space in a legal sense, Shahade skillfully transformed his life's work to another sphere. Palestinian Walks describes a series of 6 walks or hikes through the West Bank. It represents a turn from Shahade's discussion of space to a defense of Palestinian place through eloquent description of personal history, landscape, and a renewed sense of being. The turn to values is the signal to the reader that the discussion, formerly confined to legal definitions of Palestinian space, now involves place as well. That is not to say that Shahade has given up a struggle for Palestinian space. All the stakeholders in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict need space to live and set up their households. The separation barrier coming after the Oslo Accords signals a continuing requirement to address needs for both space and place. Shahade's final track in Palestinian Walks is a poignant account of how Palestinian and Jewish Israeli senses of place might come together. In his 6th walk, Shahade was picking his way along paths that formerly were unobstructed when he suddenly came across a young Jewish Israeli near a seasonal creek or wadi. He noticed that the man was smoking a water pipe and had a gun next to him. Taken aback, but saying nothing, Shahade decided to leave by crossing the brook. He accidentally dropped his hat into the water, however. The Israeli called out, "You dropped your hat." Surprised, Shahade tried to retrieve it, but the Israeli was quicker and came up with the hat. The Israeli began a conversation with Shahade. As described in the book, the two people spoke of many deep issues dividing Palestinians and Jewish Israelis. The surprise, however, is found in the values that they share in appreciating the landscape, and especially by the fact that they end up smoking together. And they were not smoking tobacco. It is a small thing, really, but Shahade's account gives a palpable sense of hope through the shared value of place. Shahadi's turn to a focus on the sense of place in Palestinian walks suggests a way forward in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Certainly place depends on a modicum of space, but place is an imaginative value. As Syed Qutb puts it in another place, in the shelter of this idea, the peoples of all races, colors, and territories can associate as people of one homeland. Because the concept of place is plastic and malleable, it offers an opportunity to share values across religious, cultural, and linguistic boundaries. What can one say about the Jewish need for a sense of place? Chaim Gantz, professor of law at Tel Aviv University, holds that the Jewish remedial right to self-determination in the land of Israel is based on the historical events that led up to and included the Holocaust, Hebrew Shoah. He writes, "It was not until the 1930s that the persecution of the Jews became serious enough to create an incontrovertible necessity for the Jews to realize their right to self-determination in Palestine. It is the Nazi rise to power and the Holocaust that followed which ultimately rendered the persecution of the Jews shocking to the extent that it demanded an urgent solution," end quote. The ideology of the National Socialists included the claim that Jews were not fully human beings. By erasing Jewish humanity, cultural life, and achievement, the Nazis thereby denied Jews the right to a sense of place. The attack on Jewish place is much in evidence in accounts of Jewish experience during the Holocaust. Primo Levi, the Italian writer and Holocaust survivor, clearly describes the Nazi assault on Jews having a right to any place or any sense of place in this world. Levi begins his book, Survival in Auschwitz, by noting that the premise, "every stranger is an enemy," is common among peoples and nations. He calls it a latent infection, however, and argues that when carried rigorously to its logical conclusion, it leads to the Lager, the German term for concentration or extermination camp. A relevant lesson about dealing with strangers can be derived from Shahadi's conversation with the Jewish Israeli settler. The duty to treat strangers hospitably is thoroughly grounded in obligatory laws of all three religions of the book, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. For example, it is made very clear in the following passage from Leviticus. "And the Lord said to Moses, when a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. The stranger who sojourns with you shall be to you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." This passage from the Hebrew Bible is found in the context of God giving Moses the statutes for organizing a flourishing society. The speech is given in a long series of ordinances handed down to Israel. Islam, too, enjoins specific duties to strangers. In the hadith called Sahih al-Bukhari, the Prophet Muhammad said, "Whoever believes in God and the last day, let him honor his neighbor. Whoever believes in God and the last day, let him honor his guest as he is entitled." But the Prophet also set a limit to such duties. In another hadith it says, "And it is not lawful for a guest to stay with his host for such a long period as to put him in a critical position." Perhaps this passage could be applied to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in terms of a moral obligation for Jewish immigrant, quote-unquote, guests not to place their Palestinian hosts in such a critical position. A balance must be sought between hospitality and imposition, Yet the sacred texts are in basic agreement, for in a number of hadiths, Muhammad echoes the Jewish belief that originally the people of God were strangers in the land, and it is thus incumbent upon one to treat strangers hospitably. The linkage of the Holocaust to the right of Jewish self-determination in a homeland of historical significance to themselves is established not by a simple cause and effect relationship between the Holocaust and the state of Israel. Rather, the linkage is established as a remedy for the lack of place that the destruction of European Jewry caused during the last century. The remedy continues to be needed, but we must clearly acknowledge that Jewish return to their place, called the land of Israel, has affected the Palestinians adversely. Gans argues that Jewish right to a homeland does not imply a right to the whole of the land, but merely to a part of it. It is now the case that the Palestinians require a remedy. The remedy begins with the recognition of Palestinian place and the need for a modicum of space within the larger space that is Palestine/Israel. Such a remedy is possible in the form of sharing space and granting unique place to one's neighbor. Violent wars, campaigns, and incidents that mar the relationship of Jewish Israelis and Palestinians are not the normal mode of existence, even if their frequency has made them appear so in the media. People live out their normal everyday lives in the places they call home, even if ravaged by violence and surrounded by the signs and symbols of conflict. Everyday people, with their attachments to place and their need for a modicum of space, give specification to the minimum requirements that are needed to find a better way moving forward. My hope through this discussion has been to increase our understanding of our own and our neighbors' perspectives, to see the historical and religious forces that have brought us to the present situation, and to suggest a way forward through shared recognition of our common desire for a place to call home. Thank you.